Hey everyone, this seems to be as good a time as any to finish what I started. Yes, I'm talking about the story of 2002. My name is Phil, and you're listening to The Lib. Okay, everyone, as you heard from last week's episode, where I began to tell the story, which was much bigger than I originally planned months ago when I thought about doing this show. I'm going to reiterate and tell you that yes, this was originally supposed to be a story about one particular thing that happened to me in the year 2003. But as the time went on and I began to make mental notes that I would be using for the show, it dawned on me that, well, I can't just tell the story that I wanted to tell from 2003 without going much, much deeper. In fact, creating a large prerequisite to 2003, essentially the activities that I did in 2002. Very simply stated, if it wasn't for a great many decisions and things that happened to me from 2002, I would not, and I stress, would not have had a certain outcome in 2003. Things would definitely look a lot different for me. Granted, I can't imagine in the grand scheme of things how it could have gotten a whole lot worse. But truthfully, based on the things that I had already told you from the episode from last week, which was my 2002 from January until half of May, I can definitely tell you, just in that small section alone that I did, there were certainly things that would have had real repercussions had I not been able to, I guess you could say, proceed as they did. One quick sort of recap. I essentially was talking to a few people about a vacation that I was going to take. I took that vacation, and it turned out that, well, the assistant manager that I was working with decided to steal a whole lot of money and essentially try to blame me for it. In a nutshell, that's pretty much what happened. But of course, there's more details to it. If you haven't listened to the episode from last week, I strongly urge you to listen to that one before continuing to listen to this one because the events of my last show will make the events of this show more clear and make a lot more sense. But for those of you who did listen to the show from last week, rest assured, I'm going to literally pick it up right where I left off. And theoretically, like I said last week, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to finish the entire show and get through 2002. I'll only know that when I get to a certain point and I realize that I have a lot more to go. But truthfully, I don't know if that's going to come about or not until, well, until I go through it. So it's sort of wait and see. But either way, I need to tell this story and I need to give it my full attention. And without question, this is definitely a story that I want to tell. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. But before we go into that, we have to fill in the blanks. And the question today for the fill in the blanks on this episode, which is going to be released on May 3rd, 2025. Yes, May 3rd, 2025. 2 days before my birthday. Happy birthday, me. Yeah. Um, but at the same time, I'm actually recording this almost a month earlier here on April Fool's Day, April 1st. But I digress. What is the question that has a blank that needs to be filled? Fill in the blanks. The question is, when I was beginning to take my trip on that 11-day vacation to go and eat pizza, did I realize that I was going to actually go to as many pizza places as I did? And the blank can be simply filled in by me saying, I had no idea how many pizza places I was going to go to. No clue. I had in my head about 15 to 25 that I absolutely knew that I was going to hit. And then there was probably about another 10 that I had seen in passing just driving around throughout the state of New Jersey and have seen those places but never actually stopped to go in. So I figured that that was my opportunity to go and do so. But did I know I was going to go to 49 pizza places? Did I think that I was going to go to 39 pizza places? No, I had no idea. I had absolutely no clue as to how many pizza places I was going to go to. So once again, the fill in the blank question is, did I know that I was going to go to as many pizza places as I did during my 11-day vacation? And the blank is filled in by me saying, no, I had absolutely no idea how many pizza places that I was going to actually end up going to. Okay, it's time to ring the bell and begin the main event. The main event for me to come back into this story that I'm telling you about my 2002. I left off by telling you that the assistant manager who attempted to get me fired was fired himself. And we are now in the middle of May. I had returned from what was a really fun vacation for those 11 days, 49 different pizza places, 117 slices of pizza, and, well, I was full of energy and ready to just get back to the norm, you know? Go ahead and grind away. At this point, my birthday had passed because it was the middle of May now, and I am now 24 years old. 2 dozen. How about that? And as I was getting back in the swing of things on maybe the first or second day of my return, after having been, I'm not going to say overly chastised because I really wasn't. Um, the store manager, who I was calling Steve A, and the food service manager, who eventually became the assistant manager, Beth, they really didn't mention it too much. It was just sort of, I guess they were trying to sort of hide the fact that they thought for a little bit that maybe I was the one who was stealing the money. And they sort of played it off as if, well, we were wrong. We're not going to worry about it. You were good. We didn't have to think about you doing anything like that. But Steve T, the gentleman who was the customer service leader, that first level of management, who had multiple years of managing different businesses that he owned and being an investment banker and loan officer, he saw that I was really lackadaisical in my approach to being a shift runner, which, to reiterate, was the first level up from just being a regular associate. Not really anything over the top, not in management, but you get more responsibility. You get to count the safe and hold the keys. And the simple fact that I wasn't really paying attention to I guess, the seriousness and really the importance of what I was doing with other people's money, essentially, at Wawa. It wasn't my money, it was Wawa's money. And I was, I guess you would have to say, if I'm going to really be honest, at 46 years old that I am right now, this was literally half my life ago. And it's real easy for me to say that I probably was a little irresponsible for the position that I was at the time. Part of the reason was not because of lack of actually being in charge of certain important things. It was just the desire and the actual care of what I was doing. I certainly did not. I didn't really put it into it too much because prior to this, I had actually had a leadership role in the church that I had attended, and not just I attended, the church that my family attended. At a very young age, very young, I was um, an usher at my church at 9 years old. And by the time I was 11, I was actually the president of the usher board of the church. And I maintained that position until I was 19 years old. That's a long time, especially when you're only 11. That's a majority of my life. I was actually the president of the usher board at that point in time. But now I'm not the president of the usher board. I took that a lot more seriously than I did these people's money at Wawa. And Steve T recognized that I probably had a lot more to offer, and I was still relatively young and essentially rudderless, if that makes any sense. I had no direction. I really didn't have anything that I was really aiming at because in 2002, that puts me about a year and a half after I had gotten out of college and stopped going, essentially, for lack of a better term, lack of funds. I stopped going to school, which of course was a blessing and a curse at the same time. Ultimately, I fell in love with radio as a major, and funeral services was what I was looking to get at. But I just, I really wasn't focused on it too much. And by the time I got focused when I started doing radio and I realized how much I really enjoyed it, like I said, I just was running out of time as far as financially. And so I had just given up on it and was sort of going through the motions at Wawa. Now, Steve T noticed that, and here in mid May, after returning from this vacation, he pretty much figuratively grabbed me by the ear and said, "Hey, you're not really trying to do anything else. You've been doing this job at Wawa for now 3 years at this point. You pretty much know everything that the regular associates know. And you've been a shift runner long enough to really get a good understanding of what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And truthfully, the experience of this assistant manager stealing money and setting me up essentially to take the fall for it, I now had a nice bit of an experience that I could learn from and get better at doing what I was doing. And so Steve T made it his mission to make me a better employee and to eventually groom me and maintain me to become a manager at his level at minimum. At minimum. Now, like I said, he had already advanced in his other careers to the point where he was only doing this because he liked the 401k that Lala had to offer at the time. He put half his check into it. He liked it so much. And so what he did was he started telling me to do little things to improve my financial stability at that young age. Now, not to veer off course too far, but I can certainly tell you it would have been to my benefit had I maintained a lot of the things that he told me to do. Now, the knowledge is still in my head of what he told me to do, but unfortunately, the finances are not there. Now, had I continued to do what he had told me to do, this retirement of mine would have been a lot different than what it is right now. Oh, yeah, definitely. But now, to refocus on my return, we'll get back to the money a little bit. But for now, I'm back at the store and I'm working, and he's told me all these things. And they actually sunk in. A 24-year-old kid actually listened to what an older, wiser gentleman was telling him. And I had that sort of eureka moment and said, yeah, you know, you're right. I should just take this a little bit more seriously. Now, during May, when I returned, another really interesting thing happened. We had been in need of a few more employees, and they had hired a girl that I'm going to call Anne. Now, Anne came from Florida, and she moved up and was staying with her aunt at the time in Lakehurst, where the store was located, very near. And her aunt happened to be a friend of one of the other employees that I worked with at the store at the time. Um, we'll call this employee. Um, what will we call this employee? Uh, she's actually pretty important to this little part of the story. Um, I'll call her um, Jean. Jean was the friend of Anne's aunt, and when Anne came to New Jersey, Jean was able to talk to Steve A and was able to get Anne an opportunity to get an interview and eventually get hired to work at the store with us. And it was a good thing. It turned out that Anne had some college in her and didn't finish, much like I did. But she wanted a new situation. She wanted a change of scenery. That's why she left Florida and came to New Jersey to essentially seek her fortune elsewhere and see what could be different and see how life could move on in a different way. Now, Anne was very focused and smart and within the first couple of weeks for her, which would have been the last couple of weeks in May, Beth really took a liking to her. Beth was the food service manager who eventually became the assistant manager. And much like Steve T was putting a lot of time into showing me a lot of different things, Beth was doing the very same for Anne. Only she was in a position where I can't be, how can I put it, jealous. But during that time period, the first couple of months that for the end of May and then June of 2002, the first 3 weeks into that, Beth pretty much showed Anne everything that she could show her at the level that she was at. And she picked it up perfectly well and was an essential part of the 7 to 3 crew. And this didn't go unnoticed by Steve A either. And they both realized how effective that Anne was at what she was doing. And so what they did at that point was they wanted to see if they could get her to expand her horizons. And they had her working a few 3 to 11 shifts with me and with Joe at the time. And she began to learn the routine of 3 to 11 during that period of the month of June. She got to the point where she became really, really effective on either shift, the day shift, 7 to 3, or 3 to 11. And this is how her June was going. Now, for me, I had been essentially requested by Steve T to work overnight with him. And essentially, when I was working overnight with Steve T, I was put underneath the learning tree, as they say. He would take the time to show me everything he was doing. And more importantly, he showed me how to do everything he was doing. And more importantly still, he showed me why it was important to do those things. And sometimes people think, okay, it's good to know the how, but realistically, the most important part is the why. And the why is what he showed me about a lot of the stuff. It's the why we do this. Why do we wait until a certain time to do a certain thing? Why do we do a certain thing in front of certain people? And the answer is real simple, and I'll get to that as I move on. But ultimately, I was getting trained and polished by Steve T, and Beth was training and polishing Anne on the 7 to 3 shift. Now we move on to the month of July, where both of us were really going to class. And I can certainly say that I was, can I say I was going to class more specifically than Anne was? I can make that statement because even though Beth had been in the system of Wawa for a long time, she was an assistant manager at another convenience store years prior, Cumberland Farms, where she understood how all of this convenience store stuff worked. And she really helped and figured it out myself with Steve T. He was not a convenience store guy, but he was a management guy. And part of the reason that he became a customer service leader was it was a favor to the manager that was at my location prior to um it's like prior to Steve A taking that store. He made a deal with the former manager, and the deal was he would become a customer service leader for him as long as he was able to work at the training center for Wawa, which of course he ended up advancing and becoming the manager of the site. But at the time, during the story, 2002 up until for a while, the training center was just what it said. It was a training center. And Tom, Steve T was in charge of the training center. So he was able to train people. He was the trainer of trainers, even. And the deal with it was really funny because he essentially knew all of the policy of Wawa and he put it into my head as best as he could, and I retained as much as I could. So realistically, I was getting management training from the instructor of the training center. And to put it in perspective, nowadays, orientation and such doesn't happen at a building off-site. All this stuff happens in store. Before I left the company, they made the management team official store trainers, and which makes sense. And depending on how much time you had or what you were assigned, you would sometimes be instructed during your shift to train somebody. Whereas prior to that point in time, like 2002, when we're talking this story, you would go to an off-site building and you would learn the basic fundamentals that you needed to know in order to walk into a Wawa and work. At the time, there was deli slicers. You learned how to use the deli slicer. You learned basic fundamentals of how to make the different hoagies that they had. You learned the basic fundamentals of how to wrap those hoagies. They taught you um, make a pot of coffee. They taught you how to set up the Bain Marie, which is where all the food for the subs were. They gave you a quick crash course on the hot foods. So when you walked through the door and you got behind the counter, you had an idea of what was going on. Now it's a little different. A lot of times you don't really have that until you get in there and you sort of kind of have to hit the ground running. But fortunately for me, Steve T gave me an executive management course during the month of July. Now, again, Anne was getting the same sort of treatment during the day with Beth and the store manager, Steve A. And they were so pleased with what they saw and having her move up and down the shifts, going to work on the 3 to 11 shift with me and others, and then doing a few overnights as well, so that she could get a foothold on how those shifts ran. And in the month of July, uh, Beth recommended to Steve A, the store manager, that Ann be promoted to shift runner. Now, this was pretty quick. Not that we're talking about an advanced degree in rocket science, but a lot of people aren't going to get moved that quickly through the ranks. But she did. She was only in there for 2 months, and she had gotten to where I had gotten over 3 years. Sounds like a jealousy story, but it's really not. Because, like I said, at 24, I was just there to make a paycheck so that I could buy the next video game. And this is where Steve T kept holding my ear, pulling me to the side, telling me things that I had essentially, it's not like I wasn't listening, but it was sort of, it was hitting me, and I was just essentially a field, and he was throwing seeds on the field and just throwing them on the ground. And a lot of times those seeds would just get blown away, birds would eat them, stuff like that. But a couple of those seeds would get into the ground and they would start to grow. And I would get better at things that Steve was showing me. And that's kind of how my July went, where I was just like picking up stuff and it was just taking a little bit longer, but at the same time, longer than he would have liked, but he wasn't going to stop. Steve T kept me motivated, or at least he tried to maintain that motivation. And I'm glad he did, because at the end of the day, the lessons that he taught me in July and beyond are things that I used when I was in, when I was running auto shops, when I was just a corrections officer, not in charge, but I was able to use those management skills in order to handle certain situations. And it was definitely something that way back half my life ago, 23 years ago, I absolutely wasn't really thinking was important whatsoever. But looking back now, I can see that each one of those lessons that I was begrudgingly accepting were definitely helping me on the way. Now we're going to move to August. And Joan has been running back and forth, doing all the different shifts, because just like everywhere, it seems like August is the month that everybody wants to go on vacation. And it goes to the point where they needed Joan to work a lot more day shifts. And usually she was the 3 to 11, and occasionally she would work an 11 to 7 overnight. But her primary shift was 3 to 11. But considering that there were a lot of people who were going on vacation at the time, Jean from the day shift, she wasn't quite in management, but she was eventually going to take over the food service from Beth when Beth became the assistant manager. And Steve A took a couple of weeks in chunks of vacation time, as did Beth in the month of August. So Joan was needed to do day shift, and so she did, and I was running a lot more of those 3 to 11 shifts when Joan was doing a lot of those 7 to 3 shifts. So now I'm getting a lot more reps. Not that I wasn't getting, I would maybe get maybe 2 a week out of the 5-day week, but during this stretch of vacations during the month of August, That whole month, I was probably running the shift every bit 3 and 4 times a week, as opposed to 1 or 2. I was doing it 3 or 4, and my safes came up normal. I had no issues. I got all the work that I needed to get done. Had my people do the work that they needed to get done, and things were moving very efficiently. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I benefited from what Steve T was showing me. And every time he came in to relieve me, he essentially gave me the old football attaboy. Pat on the back, things look great, I'm getting better. Now, I was feeling pretty good about it. I guess you could say I was feeling myself a little bit. And he started putting a bug in my ear. He knew something that and because he knew it, he wanted to put that bug in my ear. Now, granted, Anne was 21 years old, grown woman. I was 24 at the time. And the bug that he put in my ear was, I don't know, you're getting a lot better at this. Just since May till August, that simple month, those couple months, you've improved both in attitude and in ability. He was saying, I don't know why you don't want to maybe move up to management. And I was telling him it seemed like it's a small store. I don't know if there's any room for it. And he just sort of kept putting that little bug in me every couple weeks between the end of July and August. And I didn't have any idea why he did that until September. Ta-da! Now we're in the month of September of 2002. And I know why he put that bug in my ear. Because at the age of 21 in the month of September, um, and by recommendation of Beth and um, approval of Steve A, the store manager, they were promoting Ann to customer service leader, which I said earlier was the first level of management. And she was going to be provided with a bit of a raise, health benefits, vacation time, the quarterly administrative day, and she was going to get all of that in an extremely fast period of time. Now, granted, you could apply for that position and get it if you had the experience to do it. But she had no experience in management at all, and she got it because of the tutelage she received from both Beth and Steve A. And I'm 100% sure I never asked him. And we're talking 20 plus years, and I haven't seen the man in, good grief, must have been, last time I saw him was 2007. What is that? Almost 20 years, 18 years I haven't seen the man. And I never asked him if he knew that Anne was going to be promoted and if that was the reason why he was really, really kind of stressing that maybe you could do it too. Because, like I said, I was rudderless. I wasn't really focused on anything. Whereas Anne was like, she's trying to establish herself in New Jersey and get herself a little bit of foothold and start something, maybe. And I was just sort of floating around in the wind, really wasn't paying attention much. And I think personally that maybe Steve T was looking at me and saying, yeah, you can do this too. And you've had more experience. You could probably make this work. And I was like, I wasn't really thinking about it until September when she was promoted. And I was like, okay, I guess that's all right. Didn't really think about it. And Steve T was just throwing it out there. And then it seems like everybody wants to be on the same sort of wavelength when it comes to this. Because one of the other customer service leaders that I had worked with at the other store, the one in Whiting, that my former manager had worked with, she would come to the store and she would talk to Steve T. And then I would talk to her because I liked her. We were friends. And she had said that she had moved from that store once the other manager had left, and she moved to a store, um, where was it? Beechwood, I believe, Beechwood, New Jersey. And Rick was her manager. And she was like, "Man, I've seen you. I know you. You're smart enough. Steve T's been working with you. Why don't you become a manager?" And I was like, I don't know. That's not really my cup of tea. I'm not really focused on it. But then Steve T was like, "You've been pretty much doing everything a manager's supposed to do." In fact, he actually showed me, like I said, he showed me everything he was doing. And one of the things at the time was he had to place an order, and then there was certain things that needed to be inventoried by management, and he showed me how to do all of that. And I was doing everything I needed to do. And so Sandy said, "Come on by. Come on to my store. Talk. The very least you can do is you can explore it." And I told her, "Well, just like the good old JR says about his barbecue store, it doesn't cost anything to look." And so I looked. I looked. Steve T said, "Well, you should go and you remember the old manager that we had before." I didn't actually give him a name. I don't know why I didn't, but in my other incarnation of this story, I will. Oh, I did. The manager's name was Stan. I called him Stan. So Sandy and Tom, not Tom. Tom is another person that I haven't gotten to yet. I keep looking at my notebook and I keep calling people by name that I shouldn't call them because I haven't gotten to that part in the story. Sorry. Steve T is the customer service leader, and Sandy, the other customer service leader, both of them told me to go and explore this. That's where I was at. So I went to the Beechwood store and I ran into, on my day off. Now, Sandy was at work, and I'm talking to her. I'm looking to see if I can find um, Rick, who was the manager of her store. He actually was out when I went in there that day, so I didn't get to speak with him. But right down the road was Stan's store, and I went in there and I spoke to a few people who I worked with, and was just putting out some feelers, exploring to see if they would think that I would be somebody who could be in management, because I'm the kind of person who likes to sort of test the water. And with the fact that Steve T and Sandy had both thought that, well, why not? You should probably do it. And in my mind, I thought that if I was going to do it, it would have to be another store because of Joan and Steve T already there, and with Beth being the food manager, there was no room for me in this place. And the fact that they had just hired Anne to be a customer service leader, which means that there would have been three customer service leaders already, a food service manager, which eventually was going to turn into an assistant manager, which I wasn't aware of yet. And Gene was going to take over that spot. So ultimately, there was going to be Joan, Steve T, and Ann at customer service leader. Beth was going to be the assistant manager, and ultimately, Gene was going to be the food service leader. So that's five managers plus the store manager. So that's six managers, six full-time managers at the store. Now, having six full-time managers doesn't sound like a whole lot, but you got to consider the roster of the entire store. There were 15 of us that worked in the store, top to bottom. That's all the employees we had, 15, and six of them were managers. 6 out of 15. That's a little better than 2 to 1. You know what I mean? It is. I mean, six managers and a total of 15 people in the whole store. Nah, it's a little less than 2 to 1 because 1 to 1 is 12. And then so it was less than 1 to 1. My fault, not 2 to 1, but less than 1 to 1. Less than one employee. No, a little more than one employee. So it's an employee and maybe an arm. And that would be managed by one person, including the store manager. So I'm thinking there's just not enough bodies for them to add another manager because if that happens, now all of a sudden, if I became a manager, I would have to maybe get to manage a leg and maybe two arms because out of everybody else, the other managers would have a body, a full human, and then they would have maybe a leg or an arm, something like that. And since I was the last person on the totem pole, I would only get the leftovers. I'd only get, like I said, I'd only get maybe a leg and two arms. So it didn't make any sense in my mind to even consider being a manager at my store. Then maybe a week later, um, after going to Stan's store and Rick's store, Rick, who actually lived very close to my store in Lakehurst, was in there when I was running shift, and he came to me and he said, "Hey, Phil, if you want to become a manager, you can come right over to my store. I got plenty of room." And how did that make any sense? Because he had a gas store. Now, the store that I was working at with only 15 employees, that was one of those small hole-in-the-wall stores that only had few parking spaces but no gas station. And in New Jersey, unlike in Pennsylvania, a gas store is something to behold beyond behold. Because not only do you have about roughly, you can have, I don't know, 45 people working inside, but you probably have about 15 to 20 working outside as gas employees. So those stores easily can have anywhere between 65 and 75 employees. Plenty of room for more management because if you get somebody who is a manager and they're guaranteed their 36 to 40 hours a week, that's one less slot you might have to put in because there'll be a body. Whereas opposed to the small store that I worked in, we only had, like I said, 15 people, including management. So there was a lot less people to have to fill in the slots, but there was a lot less needed either. I mean, the shift on the gas store on a 3 to 11 would probably have about 15 people. in New Jersey because of the law that you have to have somebody pump gas. There's going to be at least four guys or women outside pumping gas, and then the deli and the registers are all going to have people. So it's going to be about 15 people inside. Where in the small store on the 3 to 11 shift, on average, you would have one cashier, one person in a deli, one manager, and if you were lucky, the person in the on the register wasn't a minor, and they could stay until 11, but most of the time it was. So usually after 9 o'clock, it'd just be the two of you. But having said all of that, with all these moving parts, it just seemed as if there was not going to be any room for me to be a manager in the store. Especially, like I said, once Ann got her spot. Now, I was offered a spot at Rick's store. He just flat out offered it to me. All he said is, all you have to do is just let Steve A know that you want to go, and we'll just fill out the paperwork, and we will make you a manager tomorrow. Just got to do all the interviews and stuff like that, and you're there. And so after thinking about it for about a week, after Rick had come to me telling me that he was going to be able to take me on, I consulted with Steve T, and he said, "Yeah, you should do it, but just make sure you do it the right way. You tell you tell Steve A that you're considering leaving and why you want to leave." And so I did. I sat down in the back right before the end of uh, his shift, and I came in probably 15 minutes early so make sure I could talk to him. And the conversation, word for word, went like this. And there's not many things that I can say that I absolutely 100% remember the entire conversation, but this one always in my head, and I remember exactly what it was, word for word. I come down and I say, of course, the man's name isn't Steve A, but like I said, that's what I'm calling him. Steve, um, can we talk for a minute? He said, sure. What do you want? What do you got for me? He said, well, I had been talking to a couple other people, and I think I want to go to Rick's store and become a CSL, become a manager. And right then, it was almost as if my mouth had just closed and the words just came out of my mouth. And Steve A instantaneously said, well, why don't you become a manager here? That's my reaction. He said, why don't you become a manager here? And I was like, well, I didn't think that there was going to be enough room for me to actually be a manager here. After I started my inquiry into trying to see if it was something that A, I could do, and B, that there was real interest in me actually being able to do this. And they said, not a problem. We have plenty of space. We can do it. And in my mind, like I said, it was like a little better than one-to-one management to the regular associates. And if I switched over to the other side, it's going to be even more lopsided. And he said, no problem. We'll just call Rachel, who was the district manager, and we'll set something up. We'll let her know that you would like to be a manager, and I strongly recommend that he has all the qualifications, and we'll set something up. And we'll get you to a point where you can do an interview. And I'm like, okay, great. And this happens in September. Now, at this point, Steve A now goes into ultra overdrive because now he sees that, yes, I'm showing the initiative and I am going to take that assignment on and do the interview for management. What he says at this point is extremely important to my success as a manager. He says, hey, congratulations, good job. You're going to be a good manager. And we're going to go and we're going to show you some things that are going to make you even a better manager. Like, oh, yeah, that's cool. Now, October comes, and in October, I had now gotten myself together mentally around the fact that, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this management thing. And Steve T is helping me a great deal, and Steve A was gracious enough to actually put me in the midnight shift for about a month, the whole month of October. And it was sort of like a mentorship, essentially. I was just working with Steve T this entire time, learning the actual applications and things that I would need to do as a manager, more so than just the little things, just some more nuanced things that I was not really paying attention to. And one of the things is that being a leader and being a manager are two totally different things. I'll explain in a minute. But during this period of October, now I was telling Joan and I was telling both Anne that, yeah, I'm going to join your ranks. And by this point in time, Beth had become the assistant manager. And Jean took over her spot, who's service manager. And so we had even two more managers, three more managers from July until eventually my promotion was going to come up because there was a little hiccup in it. And it had nothing to do with me or anything else in the store. It turned out that in October, um, the regional manager, Rachel, was reassigned from our region. And a new guy started. We'll call him Brett. And what Brett had to do was he had to slowly assess everything that was going on in Rachel's region. And he was just a manager at a gas store and had been promoted to a regional manager. So at this time, he needed to sort of assess the bigger picture and see what was going on. So, where my interview was set to happen in November, he needed time in order to really establish himself and get all the stores that he had and learn what was going on and the nuances in the management of those stores before he could really do anything else. And so he put any interviews that was set up for Rachel to do, he postponed them until December. So anybody like myself and how many other people he had to interview, I don't know. But all of us had to wait until December, and he cleared out a block in his schedule. I can't remember, it was a week or 2 weeks at the end of December where he was going to do interviews, and that would be how he wanted to start his new year by getting these new managers in place for the next year, 2003. But you see, during this time in October, like I said, I was doing a lot of those overnights working with Steve T and learning those nuances. And now I'm going to talk about both the money issue and I'm going to talk about um, the leadership management issue. We'll start with the money because Steve T was a money guy. And the first thing he told me was, "You are 24 years old. You're a virtual baby. You don't have any money. But even with this job, you can get yourself started and save money." And this is something he told me. It's like, you already started a pretty good idea when you were on your vacation to go to those pizza places. It's how much did you save? I told him it was like $1,000. You saved over $1,000 between September and when you went. It was, yeah, 3 months. Now, he told me, imagine if you had taken that money and put it someplace where it could get any type of interest. Because I told him after I got my check, I just took the money and I put it away in cash. Because imagine if you put that money somewhere where you could get interest. And imagine if you didn't take that money out. You would have, you could have more money than $1,000. And then he said, well, let me show you some things that you should do between now and the time you get into management. The first thing he said is a real simple way to begin to save is you buy bonds. Now, he told me that he bought a $50 bond every single month without fail. $50 bond, $50 bond, $50 bond every month without fail to go on top of his other investments that he has. Just a $50 bond. Doesn't have to be much. It's $25 in order to get a $50 bond, and he bought one every month. And of course, that made me think to myself, well, if he's buying a $50 bond, and I really don't have any reason to not take this money to save it, I started buying $100 bonds based off his recommendation. While I used the Stars card system as well. And what I did was I took and created a couple of accounts from the Stars card, and I made deposits into my account in both savings and checking. I would put every other week, I'd put $20 in one week, and I'd put $10 in the next week. So I'd put essentially $5 in each account, and then I put $10 in each account every other week. Started building up money that way. Well, then he told me about the 401k program that Wawa had, which was pretty good as far as 401k programs go. Probably the best one that I've ever heard of any job I've ever worked at, actually. The 401k program was like this. Every dollar you put in, Wawa matched. Dollar for dollar, up to 3%. Dollar for dollar, 3% of whatever you put in. At 6%, they would still match 50 cents on every dollar. And he told me, you're really young and you could set the thing for aggressive or not so aggressive. And he said, when you're young, you can put it aggressive. And if you lose it, you'll have plenty of time to make it back up. And so I listened to him, and that's what I did. I put it in aggressively. But I had it on a scale. I would go aggressive for a little bit, and then I'd go non-aggressive for a little bit. I would go where I'd max it out at exactly the. I'd go 10% of my income into the 401k for a little while, and then I would go up to just what they would match. I'd go 6, so I'd slide it up and down, and I'd be aggressive, I'd be non-aggressive, and I was buying those bonds all at the same time. So he had me thinking about money in the long term, which of course I didn't maintain, but that's what he helped me do, and this is the stuff that he did with me in the month of November. Then He took me on, I'm going to call it a little bit of a field trip. And this field trip was only 3 hours maybe before we went to work. And what I learned that day in November, I took with me everywhere I went whenever I managed from that day forth. What he did was he took me to go play pool. And more playing pool, he made sure to tell me these couple of things. And these things always hold true to me, and I never forgot it. And like I said, I took them with me everywhere I ever went when I was managing. The first thing he said was, there is a difference between leadership and management. Leadership is you providing guidance and telling people an instruction on what needs to be done and telling them how to do it and how to get from point A to point B. You're leading the way. You're forcing the issue sometimes. You're making things happen. You're the one who's guiding the ship. That's leadership. Management is seeing the picture and knowing that you have so many things that need to be completed, and you just need to make sure that you can delegate those things so that you can complete all the things you're trying to do. That's why he took me to play pool. It was a real simple lesson. He's like, the only thing you know is that you need to get the 8 ball in at the end. The only thing you know is you need to make sure that your safe is clear at the end of the night. The store is clean. And you go home. That's your 8 ball. Now, how you get to that's up to you. You just need to remember that you have so much time in order to do it. So you have to remember that whatever you've got here, at the time we had to physically make the wraps at Wawa. We had to take out the trash, fill the cooler, clean the coffee aisle, fill the cigarettes, uh, make sure that the hot food was changed, make sure the hot dogs were changed, cover the salads at the time, clean the deli case, which Wawa no longer has. But we had to do all that stuff. Now, what order we did it all in didn't matter as long as we made sure that it got done. And as the manager, it was your job to make sure that all of it got done, even if it didn't necessarily get done in the same monotonous time or way that you did it before. Somebody might be like, you know what, I want to make the wraps at the end. Okay, just get them done. I want to make sure that we fill the cooler at like 9:30 before we leave. Cool. And I want to fill the cigarettes at like 6 o'clock. All right. But at the end of the day, we need to get all this stuff done. And I took that and I used it everywhere I went. Like I said, I would look at what I had to do and I would see who I had to do it with. And I would just sort of make sure to delegate amongst the people who I was working with and finish my assignments and have them finish theirs. Simple. And that's what I did. Worked perfectly. Thank you, Steve T, for that instruction. Now, I'm looking at the clock, and realistically, I'm pretty much at the end of 2002. There are certainly a few things here and there that I could have gone into, but I will finish 2002 by saying that I went in December and I did the interview with Brett. And without question, I ended up being given the position of customer service leader. And the only thing that I didn't actually talk to Steve T about was negotiations. He was way better at that. Now, after realizing that I probably could have gotten more money, and then realizing years later how to negotiate a little bit better in a situation like that, I definitely improved my negotiation game. For example, I mean, when I went to go work at SDS before it became Mavis, part of my deal was the fact that I was a mile and a half away from my house. And I told the guy who was managing at the time, there's only one way that I'll actually work here, and that one way is I will come in at 9 o'clock instead of 7. That way I can take my kids to preschool. And on certain occasions, I may need to leave to go pick them up. And I was given that concession. And I told him, in exchange, I will negotiate that for the fact that I will work on the Saturdays because at the time SCS was closed on Sunday. I told him I would work on Saturday, no questions asked, and I will close every single day, no questions asked, every time that I'm there. And it worked out. I got better at negotiating. Only took me 10 years, but I got better at it. Again, thank you, Steve T, for helping me with that lesson. But at the end of the day, my 2002 came to a close with pretty successful 2002. It did not go anywhere near the way that I thought it would. In January of 2002, I had never envisioned even going on the vacation with the pizza for 11 days. Never envisioned it. Definitely didn't see an assistant manager trying to steal all kinds of money and blame me on it. Didn't see it. Um, didn't know that Steve T and Steve A and Sandy were going to talk me into and talk me up to becoming a manager. Never saw that coming either. And all the benefits that were coming along with it, becoming a little bit more financially literate at that early age. Now, hindsight is 2020. Like I said, had I been smart enough to continue all of that, it would have worked out much better in my benefit. But as is life, right? And then, of course, like I said, at the end, the management staff with Joan, myself, Steve T, and Ann in that lower part of management, we held it down and we maintained everything. Stuff was looking good. But like I said, if it wasn't for those decisions that I made, if it wasn't for those things that happened, if it wasn't for those choices that were presented to me in 2002, my 2003 would have looked very, very differently. And next time I come at you with a show, I'm going to be focused entirely on 2003. But remember, if it wasn't for the stuff that happened here in 2002, 2003 would be looking really crazy. But as far as it goes right now, we're going to ring the bell and we're going to move the main event. It's finished and 2002 is done. Now, 2002 may be finished, but the Spear of the Week has just begun. It's real simple to me as I look through these notes of mine. The real culprit who deserves the Spear of the Week in 2003, probably, I'm going to say Brett, the regional manager, because had he not gotten the job, I might have been in management a little bit sooner, which would have made I would have made a little bit more money. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what you want to go to a job to do, is make as much money as possible. So Brett, who decided to push what would have been a interview and promotion officially in November, he pushed it off for another month into December and probably cost me a few bucks. So, Brett, you become the Spear of the Week. Now, it's time to look at the book and see a question. What is the question going to be? Let's see. Well, this is a simple one, and I'll go right with it. What are you allergic to? Well, most of the part, I'm allergic to people. Just kidding. What I'm allergic to is actually penicillin. Found that out when I was a kid. Well, my mom found out when I was a kid. Doctor told her I was allergic to it. Now, what does penicillin do to me? I don't know. No clue. Have I ever reacted to it? No. Have I ever taken it? No. But I'd rather not find out. Let's face it. Because of the information, I don't mess with rotten oranges. I just stay away from that stuff. I don't take the pills. If I have some sort of need for antibacterial, it's not penicillin that I would take. That's it. Only thing I'm allergic to. Penicillin. Coolest part is I have this neat little thing. Well, I'm not going to get it. I'm not allergic to anything but penicillin. All right. I think that I may have taken up enough of your time for this week, and I'm going to ask you to check me out on Instagram, Philip Henderson 5102. Join us on the Facebook group. Join us. There's always room for one more. I'm out there on X, TikTok. You'll find me somewhere, and of course, like and subscribe to this channel at Phil the Lip on YouTube. Then I'll describe the painting that you're looking at right now, which of course I would tell you is another one of one by me. This one is called Orchid, part of my growth series. I think it's a neat one because, well, orchid. We had an orchid in the house at one time too. We even named them. One was named Orchid, and the other one was named Orca. Unfortunately, they mysteriously were dumped and lost some soil, even though Orca lived a lot longer than Orchid did. We believe that Orca was murdered, but we couldn't find the culprit, so what are you going to do, right? At the end of the day, the growth series is going to be kind of fun. I got two more that I'm going to use for the next couple of episodes. So stay tuned and you'll see the rest of the growth series. First series I've completed for 2025. Now I'm going to pat myself on the back and say once again, I'm recording this episode way back here in April. And God willing, when this show comes out, I'll be 2 days away from my Hitman birthday. What do I mean by Hitman birthday? Well, I'll be 47. And happy birthday early happy birthday to me. Really early, considering when I'm recording this. But now, it's time for the words of wisdom. And the words of wisdom, like I told you before, I'm going to use the same ones from last week. And I may even use them for next week, because next week, I'm going to begin talking about where this story was originally going to begin, which is 2003. And the words of wisdom are: everyone has a story, tell it. You never know who needs to hear it. And trust and believe, I can't wait to tell the story of 2003. I was excited about telling 2002. Just imagine how excited I am about 2003. I'm telling you, 2003, this is the big part of this story where they all melt together. But again, I can't stress it enough. If I didn't tell you the things that happened in 2002, it wouldn't quite make as much of an impact when I tell you about 2003. It really wouldn't. And I can't wait for it. But as for now, my name is Phil, and you've just listened to The List.